Hey there, it's Kate Swoboda, also known as Kate Courageous. I'm the creator of YourCourageousLife.com, the director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and I'm the author of the book The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers everywhere and, of course, at Amazon. I coach some pretty incredible women via the Sovereign Experience, which you can learn more about at YourCourageousLife.com. I do a little group coaching help over at facilitatewithimpact.com. And now I'm the host of a new podcast, the Your Courageous Life podcast. We're going to talk about going after what you want and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. I might drop a couple of F-bombs, so don't listen with your kids in the back seat. And here we go. All right, today's episode, all about how to love yourself. Have a little bit of a story that tipped off why I wanted to talk about today's episode, and it has to do with my beloved kiddo, my beloved daughter. So basically, nearly every day of her life, and she's only 4 years old as of me recording this podcast, but literally nearly every day of her life, she has started her day snuggling on the couch with either myself or my husband. It's probably been, fewer than 10 days in her entire life, maybe, where she hasn't started out her day just like that. And 2 of them were recent because we went on a family trip and she had 2 sleepovers with her cousin. And so those mornings count as 2 of the, maybe 10 that she has not started off her day in this way. And when I'm sitting with her on the couch, I'm holding her and I'm just, we're really quiet for a little while. And I'll kiss her head. And sometimes I'll whisper into her ears. I'll say, "Oh, Annika, my lovely, lovely Annika." And I'll say, "You're so smart and kind, beautiful, such a good person." This is how she started basically every day of her life. Not a bad way to start every day, right? And of course, I do it not just because I want her to grow up believing those things, or I'm hoping she will grow up believing those things, but also because, God, it's like, how, your kids, you love them so much. It's like, how do you hold it in? And I know from talking to other parents, the day is going to come when it's going to be like, "Mom, I know, leave me alone. I don't want to, So I'm like, all right, all these years, we gotta fill up that cup until she says no. And then there was a recent day where she was going to play at a playground with some kids. And she says to me, "But Mama, what if no one likes me? What if no one wants to play with me?" And the feeling in my body when she said this was like visceral. It was like this, and I'm, obviously I'm trying not to like completely overreact to this insecurity that she's expressing, which I know is a very human insecurity. And, we talked about what to do if someone didn't want to play with her. And we talked about, how Mom and Dad are always going to love her and we will play with her. And you can always find someone to play with. And even if some people, don't want to play together. And we talked about the realities basically of the fact that sometimes people don't want to play with you, and how do you find the people who do? But it really hit me in that moment how, even though I know, this is my life's work, right? To work with people. and of course I have insecurities as well, even though I have been, doing this work and I use plenty of tools. It's just very human to have insecurities about connection, even though I know that that's a very human thing, even though I know that we have to give our goodness to ourselves, even though I know that others cannot love us for us. It is our job to love ourselves. it did not occur to me fully until this little exchange with my daughter that maybe there was a part of me that had been hoping that by snuggling with her every single morning and giving her that contact and reminding her of who I know she truly is at her core, of her goodness, that maybe she would just go out into the world and she would bypass this little piece of human suffering that I've walked through, that I know so many other people have walked through, of what if I'm not enough? What if people don't like me? What if I'm not loved? What if I'm all alone? And nobody gets a free pass. That's what I was reminded of, that nobody gets a free pass, that the work to love ourselves is our work. It's not work that anyone else can do for us. You might have been parented by the very best parents in the entire world. You could have had every advantage possible. You could have only ever been exposed to very emotionally mature people. And even then, it would still be your work to learn how to love yourself. And I think that's really profound to consider, that as you're figuring out how to love yourself, and I don't think it's like you just, oh yes, I love myself, and then boom, like you're done. Like you're a flowing, static, or a flowing, changing human being. You're not fixed in time. And the challenges that you encounter are going to necessarily push you up against new ways to stretch into loving yourself, right? You know, doubts come up, fear comes up. This is the heart of it. You're never going to get rid of that entirely. Nobody has the formula. People only ever can offer you really a process that you can engage with to try to keep coming back home to yourself. And you have to decide what that process is uniquely for you. And I'm going to put a short little interlude into this podcast that this is a boundaries thing for me, that I'm actually not wanting to receive emails from people where they tell me, well, here's how you could parent your daughter in such a way that she won't have those insecurities, or here's how I handle those things with my kids and you could do that with your kid. And like, that's not the story that I'm telling here. I'm actually really grounded in the consciousness and the attention that I bring to how I'm helping my daughter navigate this stuff. And I might not do it perfectly, probably won't do it perfectly. And that's okay. That's not why I'm telling this story. I'm telling this story so that you can consider for yourself, how do you love yourself? How do you do that? What do you actually do to make loving yourself your way of being? And so I began jotting down the things that I do in my life to try to make it possible for me to love myself, even though I'm going to fuck it up, even though I'm going to make mistakes, even though I'm just a being. And here's the list I wrote down, because I do think that as much as loving yourself there's a level where loving yourself is just like a core thing that you step into, and it's beyond any action. It's just like everything else falls away and you are nothing but love, and it would be impossible to do anything else when you're in that kind of a state other than love yourself. I've hit on those states before, and yet I feel like loving ourselves is sort of like taking care to nourish a plant. And different plants have different needs depending on the climate and the environment that they're in. And it's actually possible to have too much of a good thing, right? Like you can overwater plants. It's something to do with balance. But all of these little pieces coming together of the environment and the nourishment the plant gets, and the quality of the soil and the quality of the air and the quality of the water, and how consistently the plant gets those conditions, and whether or not the plant gets time to step away from always needing to be in bloom if it's not an evergreen plant versus come into bloom. And there's a way in which that metaphor can be applied to all of us as humans. What I need to love myself might be different than what you need to love yourself. And there are probably also some commonalities. So every plant needs at least some level of water. We might need different levels of water, but we need at least some of it. Plants need at least some of it. And I think humans can be that same way too. So consider for yourself, I'm going to list off some of the things that I try to integrate into my life on a regular basis so that I can stand up and be someone who feels emotionally sovereign over her life. I'm going to be teaching a lot of these, by the way, in the sovereign experience, because knowing that these tools exist and actually integrating them into your life and working with how habit formation works in your brain so that you are moving into these spaces without having to effort so much, that's a whole other thing. But at the very least, we can have this entry point of here are tools and strategies or actions, however you want to think of them, to start stepping into loving yourself. All right, you want to love yourself? Here's what I think. First one, and it's a big one, and I think it's the one that people are least likely to give themselves, and so that's why I'm starting with it first. Give yourself time. I think it's pretty hard to love yourself if you don't give yourself some kind of time, whether that's quiet time to think, or cry, or release emotion, or just contemplate. This is the thing, people in our hyper-productive, goal-oriented society, that's one of the things that we are least likely to give ourselves, and it is, at least for my life, been the biggest game changer. Giving myself time that has no productive outcome, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but we're talking 20 minutes a day. And if it means getting up earlier to do that, getting up earlier is how you do it. But somehow, some way, 20 minutes a day to just breathe, whether you want to call that breathing or meditation or contemplation, you can call it quiet time to think. For a long time, I was really struggling with the idea of actually meditating. That word just felt obligatory and like I had to do things in a certain way. So I started calling it time to create stillness, time to cry. And if you think that you don't have anything to cry about, that there's nothing that you could release a little bit of emotion about, you probably need hours, not 20 minutes. But there's something in the world that I know that you could take a little time to discharge some emotion around, some kind of humanitarian crisis where you could shed a couple tears for the people who are suffering, or people you love are going through a hard time, or maybe you're going through a hard time. But number one on the list, give yourself time, some kind of time to process, contemplate, breathe, discharge emotion, your experience of being human. Next on the list, I'm going to put permission for deep desires and big dreams. Permission for deep desires and big dreams. Do you give yourself full permission for the big stuff? Not the, oh, it'd be nice someday if I could take that vacation. I'm talking about the stuff you really have to lean into. Someday, I want to write a book. Someday, I'm going to get into CrossFit. I want to be best friends with a deep, connected community of women. I want to speak out and show up at my senator's office and say, you have got to change this policy. I want to raise $1 million for a cause that I believe in. I want to do an Ironman triathlon. I want to meet the love of my life. Whatever that is for you, the stuff that makes you kind of go, oh, well, that would be nice, but I don't think I could do that. Or the stuff that you kind of secretly really, really, really want for yourself, and the hints that you really, really want that for yourself are all around you. Whatever the stuff is where it would be a real stretch for you to get there, for you to be that visible, for you to risk being criticized in the name of something so big. Part of loving yourself is leaning your life in the direction of those big, deep desires, giving yourself permission. Now, here's the third thing on the list. have a form of self-expression. This is a little bit different than the deep desires. Have a form of self-expression is less about how do you make it visible, because I think there's a real thing in our society where we go, oh, I love art and I want to be an artist, so I've got to have an Etsy shop, or I've got to have a threadless shop, or I've got to have a whole social media. It's just like, maybe, okay? Like, you might have listened to the last thing I said about permission for deep dreams, and you might be going, oh my God, that's what I need. I'm an artist and I need to stretch into that. How could I possibly go another day of my life without fully committing to my art? And if that's you, great, awesome. But there are other things that we can do for self-expression that aren't necessarily about all of that visibility. I think we just need some kind of regular self-expression. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. I mean, if you have a best friend and that person is a person that you can say anything to, that is self-expression. If it's been your geeky little thing to quilt, well, you don't have to create a quilting empire, but that's your form of self-expression. So having some form of self-expression is not necessarily about the visibility piece, unless, of course, you decide that it is. It's more about how do you have some way to just kind of tap into that creative flow on a regular basis. You can write stuff that'll never see the light of day. I love the story that Elizabeth Gilbert tells in Big Magic, her book, about her friend who gets up in the morning and goes and does a little ice skating. And this friend, she points out, has no sense that she's going to become a professional figure skater or ice skater. She just does it because it's self-expression. It's just something she loves. So self-expression doesn't have to be art. It can be just really having those people that you can connect with. It can be something physical with your body. It can be something really gratifying, like volunteering at your local food pantry to make sure that people are fed. The self-expression can be the fact that you feel really lit up giving that much of yourself to people who need it. Speaking of giving, I think loving yourself has to include some element of generosity. And I see a lot of people really beat themselves up over the fact that they aren't more generous. And I think, too, that we have to think about the fact that, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. Your generosity one day, your form of activism or giving something back or trying to make the world a better place in some way might be the small chat that you have with the very tired-looking cashier at the grocery store. Speaking of which, one of my favorite games to play in the entire world is the May I Speak with the Manager game. And it just absolutely delights me to play this game. Basically, here's how it works. You experience really great service at your local retailer, hardware store, a waitress, a cashier, someone. And you finish checking out or paying for your meal or whatever you're doing, and then you go over to the service desk and you say, "May I speak with the manager, please?" And you watch, because 9 times out of 10, people are going to be kind of tense, even if you do it with a smile on your face. I mean, I certainly don't play this game. I don't mean that I go over to the service desk and I'm like, "May I speak with the," mad to try to freak everybody out. I go over and perfectly kind of say, "May I speak with the manager, please?" And 9 times out of 10, people are really stressed out as soon as you ask. And the manager, comes over and you can just see the manager's face. They look stressed out. They're like, "Oh boy." And you say to them, "I just wanted to let you know how amazing cashier number 9 was, or the waitress at this table over here was," and hopefully you try to get the person's name. "They were really thoughtful. They really took time to understand what I needed. When I needed to change my order, they were like, 'Oh, no sweat. And, I have a kid with me today and it's a lot. And I just so appreciated that. And thank you so much to you and to the entire team for this experience today.'" And it's the best game in the world to play because you can see something melt. And you'll also notice when you play this game too that the other people who work there will all be kind of eavesdropping on what's happening with, what is this customer telling the manager? And they'll start to melt. And it's just like, oh, you can probably hear it in my voice. It's so great to just create that in the world. So some kind of generosity, whether you give of your money or your time or your love. And I got to tell you another thing too, especially if you really want to elevate people's lives and people are working at some kind of an hourly wage. I'll never forget that, I have no idea who, but I in college was working in retail at a clothing store, and I was just getting like, really low wage. And I think at that time, I was getting like $5 an hour or something. That's what minimum wage was. And I got somebody who was shopping, and I don't even know who. I don't remember the experience at all, but apparently I checked with them several times in the dressing room, asked if they needed anything else. It was close to closing time. They were in a hurry, even though it meant I would get out late that night. Apparently, this is what my manager ended up telling me later. Apparently I stayed and I kept helping them, and I didn't make it about the fact that I was going to get out of work late. And they went and they told my manager how great I was, and I got like a huge raise as a result of that experience. And that's part of why I love to play the may I speak with the manager game, because you have no idea, your compliment, your love might actually make a difference for someone's financial bottom line as well. All right, so generosity. I think to love yourself is to create these experiences of delight and generosity. Speaking of loving yourself, loving others, I think, is part of loving yourself, and really loving people at the entry point with which they show up. Loving others, I think, has to go kind of hand in hand with boundaries if you're talking about loving someone with a sense of unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard is the psychotherapist Carl Rogers' term, and I think it's a really beautiful concept. And so here's how that could look. I mean, I'm thinking of a specific situation in my life right now where I'm looking at how I can love others with unconditional positive regard. I've got someone in my life who is making really passive aggressive comments. And they're making the kinds of comments where the way they phrase it when they type it out and hit return, and I read the comment, they're making it seem as though they're not saying something that they're actually saying. And we probably have all met someone who has that particular talent for saying something and phrasing it in such a way that they're communicating to you that they think you messed up, and they're annoyed with you, but they're phrasing it with just the right words that if you were to actually say, hey, I get the sense that you're annoyed here, they can go, well, what are you talking about? And on a purely human level, I think it's really fucking annoying, right? Like, that's my truth. And I can hold the fact that this very real response of going, oh, that's really fucking annoying. And I can go, all right, if I treat this person with unconditional positive regard, and it's not pity, but unconditional positive regard, I can go, you know what? What I know to be true is that if this person knew of a different way to handle this, if she had the skill set, she'd handle it differently. And I know I've been that person before who didn't have the skill set for handling something differently and was completely passive aggressive. So how do we love others with unconditional positive regard as a form of love for ourselves, but also keeping in mind that boundaries can be important because people are imperfect. And one way that we love ourselves is to go, okay, I will walk this far, but I won't go beyond that. Ian Van Zandt, boundaries are like drawing a line in the sand and saying, beyond this, I will not go, and beyond this, you cannot come. I think I'm getting that right. So loving others and also incorporating boundaries. Another way that I think we love ourselves is to live with integrity. Living with integrity as a conscious practice is what I'm talking about here. So nobody is completely and totally in integrity. This is something that my coach, Matthew Marzell, who have worked with for more than a decade, likes to insert into our coaching sessions. He'll ask me, he'll say, okay, where are you out of integrity? Everybody's out of integrity somewhere. And of course, he means himself there too. And I always appreciated that he added that because it reminded me that perfectionism is not the goal. Everybody's out of integrity somewhere, and you can still make living with integrity a conscious practice. So this is part of how to love yourself, to decide I'm going to live with integrity. It's not integrity to say I'm going to do something and then not do it. It's not integrity to do things that are out of alignment with my value system or my beliefs. I want to make my words and actions match, and I want to align them with my values, beliefs, my commitments, and my life vision. It's also not integrity, by the way, to beat up on yourself when you're not in integrity. How meta is that? So this is something to consider too, that part of loving ourselves means that we do stop and go, hey, this thing that I said to this person earlier, that wasn't in integrity for me. I love you anyway. I'm going to change it. I'm going to bring my consciousness and my attention to this because I realize that this was not in integrity for me, but I'm going to love myself anyway. And so that brings me to another way that I think we got to love ourselves. And that is facing our fear. I think we have a real fear, frankly, of looking at the ways that we're out of integrity because we're so used to shaming ourselves when we do things wrong that we just would prefer to numb out to it. We got to face our fear. We got to look at what makes me lash out, what makes me open up a bottle of wine every single night, what makes me rush in here and manipulate the situation so that people will like me. What makes me go into people pleasing? What makes me go into perfectionism? What makes me go into pessimism? How can I understand those parts of myself? We all have those patterns. It's something I talk about in the courage habit. We all have fear patterns, and the four that I predominantly talk about in my book, The Courage Habit, are perfectionism, pessimism, people-pleasing, which I call martyrdom, and self-sabotage. We all do all of them at least a little bit, but usually one of them is a bigger hook than the rest. And facing fear means really going, oh, okay, I'm going to quit pretending that I don't do these things. I'm going to quit trying to do life perfectly in the hopes that I won't do these things. I'm going to quit attacking myself and beating myself up when I'm doing these things. Instead, I'm going to accept that when I feel fear, these are the patterns that I go to. And I'm going to be really conscious about how I face fear, try to get back into integrity with myself as soon as I am able. And then that brings me to the last big thing I'll talk about for how to love yourself, which is, of course, also embedded in most of these other things I've been talking about and is also critically important. And that is relentless compassion. I'm using the word relentless because I know all too well how that voice in your head can really convince you that actually you've messed it up big enough this time that this time you don't deserve it. That's one of the little tricks that can happen. You can go a little bit with compassion for yourself. Okay, I'm going to breathe. I'm going to be compassionate with myself. All right. And then I don't know if it's always through self-sabotage or if it's just, but then that one thing will hit where it's like, boom, nope, this I can't give myself compassion for. And whenever you hit on your own personal this, you have arrived at the doorway of the very thing that is going to bring you forward the most in your life. So if the thing that you have had the most trouble forgiving yourself for was that horrible mistake that you made when you were 20, then you know that as soon as you forgive yourself for that, that's actually where the juice is. When I'm working with a client one-on-one, we talk about practices for them to undertake between our coaching sessions. And the thing I always say is that, we go through a list of, maybe 5, 6 practices. And the thing I always say is that whichever of these practices is the one that has you kind of go, oh, I don't think I can do that one, or I don't want to do that. Like, that resistance is your sign that this is actually where you'll get the most ROI for your time. ROI being return on investment. So here we are, relentless compassion. And if it seems difficult for you, welcome to the club. I think relentless compassion is difficult for everyone, especially when we've grown up in a culture that frequently equates rewards and punishments with good and bad behavior and tends not to acknowledge circumstances. There's some very real circumstances that come into play in our lives at any given time. And those circumstances are often out of our control. And that's very scary to contemplate, but very real. The truth is that I can love my daughter with everything I know how to do. I can be the very best parent that I know how to be, and I still might fall short in terms of what she feels she needs to have fully received love from me. And there's also this piece in there where she has to go as far as she's going to go with that. It's part of her, you could say karma, you could say destiny, you could say just simply it's going to be her work to actually figure out, what does it mean for me to uniquely love myself? My hope is that hearing it more and seeing love modeled for her, or seeing love modeled through watching me trying to do things to love myself, will give her a better shot at it. But the fact is that we can't save other people from this very human experience of figuring out how to love ourselves. And the thought also occurred to me that for as much as learning how to love yourself is work, there's also a space where it wouldn't take nothing from a journey now, right? I wouldn't give anything back, because for as much as this has been work to figure out how to love myself, and as much as I understand that it will also be ongoing work, it's also the privilege of a lifetime. I mean, just really let that sink in for yourself, that you loving you is the privilege of a lifetime. How lucky are you that you get to love someone as amazing as you? How lucky are all of us to get to share the planet with one another and do our best to love one another and do our best to walk hand in hand and be beside each other as each of us figures out how to fully love ourselves. That's what I've got for you today. I want to say a quick thank you to everybody who has kind of played the May I Speak with the Manager game by leaving an iTunes review. Super appreciate it. Even if you take just a moment to hit those 5 stars and that's all you do, and you don't leave a comment, it's so helpful because other people get to find out about this podcast. I also would love to connect with you around social media. I'm Kate Courageous on every network except for Facebook, where I am Your Courageous Life. And of course, hoping to connect with you through the Sovereign Experience, which is an intensive mastermind experience that combines learning and a community and individual one-on-one coaching. And in most of the upcoming year, it's going to be the only way to do one-on-one coaching with me. So check out the Sovereign Experience by heading over to yourcourageouslife.com and scrolling down until you see the button to learn more. And it's such a pleasure to do this podcast, such a privilege to talk about topics that mean something. And I just so appreciate you for listening and being part of my experience of loving myself. And I genuinely hope that this is giving you something that you can carry with you through your day so that you can sink into more self-love as well. All right. Thanks, everybody.